the moment Hannah Zimmerman stepped off the dusty stagecoach in Chloride, Arizona. She flinched so hard at the driver's raised hand that she stumbled backward into a water trough. And that was how Kyle Thatcher first saw the woman who would change everything he thought he knew about patience. It was August of 1882, and the sun beat down on the ramshackle mining town with merciless intensity. Kyle had been leaning against the general store's weathered post, watching the stage arrive, as he did most Tuesday afternoons when supplies came through. He was a tall man, built lean and strong from years of ranch work, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of summer grass. At 26, he had worked the cattle drives, broken horses, and earned every callus on his hands through honest labor. He was reaching up to adjust his hat when he saw her fall. The stagecoach driver had only been waving goodbye, his hand raised in a friendly gesture, but the young woman had recoiled as though expecting a blow. The fear in her brown eyes was so visceral, so immediate, that Kyle felt something twist in his chest. He moved forward instinctively, his hand extended to help her up from where she sat waist deep in the water trough, but she scrambled away from him, soaking wet, her dark hair plastered to her face. "Easy now," Kyle said, stopping mid-step. He slowly lowered his hand to his side, keeping his movements deliberate and careful. "I am not going to hurt you, miss. Just wanted to help you out of there." Hannah looked up at him with wide eyes, water dripping from her traveling dress. She was perhaps 23 or 24, with delicate features that might have been beautiful if they were not drawn tight with fear. Her dress, though worn and patched in places, had once been fine quality. Her hands shook as she gripped the edge of the trough. "I can manage," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kyle took a step back, then another, giving her space. He watched as she climbed out on her own, her wet skirts clinging to her legs and making the process difficult. Other townspeople had started to gather, drawn by the commotion, and Kyle could see the embarrassment coloring Hannah's cheeks as she stood there dripping on the dusty street. "Martha," Kyle called to the older woman who ran the boarding house. "Could you help this lady get dried off? She had a rough arrival." Martha Hopkins hurried over, her round face creased with concern. She was a motherly woman in her 50s who had seen enough of life to recognize trouble when she saw it. "Come on, dear. Let's get you out of those wet things before you catch your death, even in this heat." "You will be staying at my boarding house, I expect." Hannah nodded mutely, and Martha led her away, shooting Kyle a meaningful look over her shoulder. He understood. This young woman had a story, and it was not a happy one. Kyle stood there in the street long after they had gone, thinking about the terror he had seen in those brown eyes. He had grown up with 3 sisters and a mother who taught him to respect women, to move gently around frightened animals and frightened people alike. But he had never seen anyone flinch quite like that, as though the raised hand was a certainty of violence rather than a possibility. That evening, Kyle found himself at the boarding house for supper, though he usually ate at the ranch bunkhouse. He told himself it was because Martha made the best biscuits in the territory, but he knew he was looking for the young woman from the stagecoach. Sure enough, she sat at the far end of the long table, her hair now dry and pulled back in a simple bun. She wore a different dress, this one a faded blue that brought out the warmth in her eyes. She kept her gaze fixed on her plate, barely eating while the other boarders talked and laughed around her. Kyle took a seat several chairs away, not wanting to crowd her. He noticed how she tensed when anyone moved too quickly, how she kept her back to the wall and her eyes on the exits. These were the behaviors of someone who had learned to survive, not live. "You are new to Chloride," said old Pete Garrison, a retired miner who lived at the boarding house. He directed the comment at Hannah, his voice friendly but loud enough to make her jump. What brings you to our little corner of hell? Hannah's fingers tightened on her fork. I am looking for work, she said quietly. What kind of work can you do? Asked Mrs. Chen, the Chinese laundress who also boarded there. Her English was accented but clear, and her tone was kinder than Pete's. I can read and write. I can keep accounts. I worked as a governess back in. Hannah trailed off as though she had almost said something she should not. Back east. Kyle saw the way she caught herself, the way her shoulders hunched as though expecting punishment for the slip. He kept his eyes on his own plate, not wanting to add to her discomfort by staring, but his mind was working. A woman alone in the Arizona territory, running from something. A woman who flinched at raised hands. It did not take much imagination to guess what she was running from. The schoolhouse might need help, Martha offered. Miss Peters has been talking about how she cannot manage all the children alone. There are more families moving in with the mine doing so well. I would be grateful for an introduction, Hannah said, and Kyle heard the relief in her voice. The next morning, Kyle found himself inventing reasons to ride into town. His ranch was 3 miles outside Chloride, a modest operation with 100 head of cattle and some of the finest horses in the territory. He had built it himself over the past 5 years, working until his hands bled to make something of his own. He had planned to spend the day mending fences, but instead he found himself at the livery stable at 10 in the morning. His horse Lucky tied up outside while he talked with the blacksmith about absolutely nothing important. He saw Hannah walking down the street with Martha, heading toward the small schoolhouse at the edge of town. In the daylight, he could see the fading bruises on her wrists, barely visible beneath her long sleeves, but there when the fabric shifted. His jaw tightened. Hannah must have felt his gaze because she looked up, and their eyes met across the dusty street. For just a moment, something passed between them, an acknowledgement of sorts. Then she quickly looked away, hurrying to keep up with Martha. Kyle made himself scarce for the rest of the week. He had work to do, and the young woman clearly needed space and time to settle in. But he heard things around town. Hannah had gotten the position helping at the schoolhouse. She was quiet, kept to herself, but the children seemed to like her gentle way. She never raised her voice, never made sudden movements. Miss Peters, the main teacher, said Hannah had a gift for teaching the younger ones their letters. It was 2 weeks before Kyle saw her again, this time at the general store. He was picking up supplies, loading bags of flour and sugar into his wagon, when she came out with a small package under her arm. He automatically started to tip his hat in greeting, a gesture so ingrained in him that he did not even think about it. His hand was halfway to his hat brim when she flinched, her whole body going rigid, her eyes squeezing shut as though bracing for impact. Kyle froze, his hands suspended in mid-air. Then, very slowly, very deliberately, he lowered his hand back to his side. He did not tip his hat. He did not move at all for a long moment, letting her see that the raised hand had not led to violence, that it never would. "Good afternoon, Miss Zimmerman," he said softly, keeping his hands visible and still. Hannah opened her eyes, her breath coming fast. "Mr. Thatcher," she acknowledged, her voice shaking. "Nice day," Kyle said as casually as if nothing had happened. "Hot, though." "Yes." She clutched her package tighter. "How are you finding the work at the schoolhouse?" "It is good. The children are wonderful." Some of the tension eased from her shoulders as she talked about the students. "There is a little girl, Sarah Chen, who learned her alphabet in just 3 days. She is brilliant." "Mrs. Chen's daughter," Kyle said, nodding. "I have heard she is sharp as a tack." They stood there in awkward silence for a moment. Kyle wanted to say something else, to keep her talking because the fear had left her eyes when she spoke about the children, but he did not want to push. Finally, Hannah gave him a small nod and hurried away down the street. That night, Kyle sat on his porch and thought about that flinch, about the automatic expectation of violence. He had seen men hit women before. It happened, even in polite society, though people pretended not to notice. His own father had never raised a hand to his mother, had taught his sons that a real man protected women and children, not hurt them. But Kyle knew not all men were raised that way. He made a decision then. If Hannah Zimmerman was going to be in Chloride, if she was going to be part of this community, then she needed to feel safe. And if Kyle's simple gestures frightened her, then he would change the way he moved. It was that simple. The next Sunday, Kyle saw Hannah at church. She sat in the back row, alone, her hands folded in her lap. He took a seat several pews ahead, but when the service ended and people filed out, he made sure to move slowly, to keep his hands down, to not make any sudden movements in her vicinity. Over the following weeks, Kyle became conscious of every gesture, every movement he made when Hannah was near. If he saw her on the street, he would nod in greeting but keep his hands at his sides. If they passed in the general store, he would step back to give her room, moving deliberately so she could see his intentions. It became second nature, this careful dance of moving slow. Hannah noticed. Of course she noticed. Kyle could see the confusion in her eyes, the way she watched him with growing curiosity. She was used to men who moved fast, who struck first and apologized never. Kyle's deliberate slowness must have seemed strange to her. One afternoon in late September, nearly 2 months after Hannah's arrival, Kyle was at the livery stable when she walked past leading a group of schoolchildren on a nature walk. The children were chattering excitedly, pointing at birds and rocks and insects, while Hannah smiled indulgently. It was the first time Kyle had seen her really smile, and it transformed her face entirely. One of the boys, Tommy Peterson, spotted Kyle and waved enthusiastically. "Mr. Thatcher, Mr. Thatcher, are you going to be at the harvest dance?" Kyle had forgotten about the harvest dance, an annual tradition in Chloride. "I might stop by," he said. "You should dance with Miss Zimmerman," Tommy announced with the tactlessness of a 7-year-old. "She said she does not know how to dance, but I bet you could teach her." Hannah's cheeks flushed pink. "Tommy, that is not appropriate." "But Miss Zimmerman, Mr. Thatcher is the best dancer. My ma says so. She says he is light on his feet for such a big man." Kyle felt his own face heating up. "Your ma is too kind, Tommy." He looked at Hannah, careful to keep his expression friendly but not forward. "The harvest dance is next Saturday. The whole town comes out. It is a nice time if you are interested." "I do not dance," Hannah said quickly. "You do not have to dance to enjoy it. There is food, music, good company. Might be nice to meet more folks from town in a relaxed setting." Hannah hesitated, and Kyle could see her weighing the risks in her mind. Finally, she gave a small nod. "Perhaps I will attend for a short while." The harvest dance was held in the largest barn on the Peterson ranch, just outside town. By the time Kyle arrived on Saturday evening, lanterns were already lit and strung across the rafters, casting a warm glow over the assembled townspeople. Tables laden with food lined one wall, while a group of musicians tuned their instruments in the corner. The whole town had turned out, dressed in their best, ready to celebrate another successful harvest season despite the harsh desert conditions. Kyle scanned the crowd and found Hannah almost immediately. She stood near the food tables with Martha and Mrs. Chen, wearing a dress he had not seen before. It was a soft green color, simple but well fitted, and her hair was arranged in a style that showed off her graceful neck. She looked beautiful and terrified in equal measure. He did not approach right away. Instead, he greeted friends, talked with neighbors, and kept an eye on Hannah from a distance. He watched as she grew gradually more comfortable, as the familiar faces and friendly atmosphere seemed to ease some of her perpetual tension. He saw her laugh at something Martha said, a real laugh that lit up her whole face. The dancing started, and Kyle partnered with several ladies, including his friend's wife, old Mrs. Patterson, and young Sally Morrison, who had been trying to catch his attention for months. But his gaze kept drifting back to Hannah, who remained at the edge of the crowd, watching with what looked like longing. Finally, about an hour into the evening, Kyle made his way over to where she stood. He was careful to approach from the front where she could see him coming, to move at a measured pace. "Miss Zimmerman," he said with a slight bow, no hand to the hat, just a respectful incline of his head. "Would you do me the honor of a dance? I promise to go slow and talk you through every step." Hannah looked at him with wide eyes. "I told you I do not dance, cannot or do not," Kyle asked gently. She bit her lip. "Both, I suppose. I never learned. Then perhaps it is time." He extended his hand, palm up, and waited. He did not reach for her, did not crowd her. He simply offered and let her choose. For a long moment, Hannah stared at his outstretched hand. The music swirled around them, and people laughed and spun across the floor. Kyle waited, patient as stone, his hand steady. Then, slowly, Hannah placed her hand in his. Her hand was small and delicate, the fingers long and graceful despite the slight trembling. Kyle closed his hand gently around hers, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she wanted. When she did not, he led her onto the dance floor, moving at half the speed he normally would. "I am going to put my other hand on your waist," he said before doing so. "Is that all right?" Hannah nodded, though he could feel her tension through the light contact. Her other hand came to rest on his shoulder, barely touching. "The waltz is simple," Kyle said as the music started. "I will lead and you just follow. Step back with your right foot when I step forward with my left. There you go, now to the side. Good, now together. See? You are already dancing." They moved slowly around the floor, Kyle calling out the steps in a low voice meant only for her ears. At first, Hannah kept her eyes fixed on their feet, concentrating hard on not stepping on him. But gradually, as the pattern became familiar, she looked up. "You have done this before," she said, a hint of surprise in her voice. "My mother insisted all her children learn to dance properly. She said it was the mark of civilization, even on the frontier. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She was. She passed 5 years ago, but I think she would have liked you." Hannah missed a step and Kyle smoothly adjusted to cover it. "Why would you say that?" "She had a soft spot for people who were stronger than they thought they were. She said true strength was not in being unbreakable, but in putting yourself back together after being broken." Something shifted in Hannah's expression. Her eyes grew bright with unshed tears, but she did not look away. "Your mother was definitely wise." They danced in silence for a while, moving slow and careful while other couples whirled past them. Kyle was aware of every point of contact between them, of the gradual way Hannah's rigid posture began to soften, of how her hand on his shoulder grew more confident. He could have danced like this all night, this gentle swaying that was as much about trust as it was about music. When the song ended, Kyle released her immediately, stepping back to give her space. Hannah stood there, slightly breathless, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Thank you," she said. "That was nice. Any time you want another lesson, you just let me know." Over the next several weeks, Kyle found excuses to be in town more often. He would stop by the schoolhouse to drop off books for the children, careful to hand them to Miss Peters rather than Hannah directly, not wanting to presume. He would time his supply runs to coincide with the school's recess, so he could watch from a distance as Hannah played simple games with the younger children, her laughter carrying on the dry desert wind. He continued his practice of moving slow. When he saw her on the street, he would call out a greeting before getting too close, announcing his presence. If he needed to reach for something near her in the general store, he would warn her first. "Excuse me, Miss Zimmerman, I am just going to reach past you for that jar of preserves." At first, people around town thought he was being overly formal, teasing him about his careful manners. But the older women, the ones who had lived long enough to recognize the signs, they understood. Martha pulled him aside one day and squeezed his hand. "You are a good man, Kyle Thatcher," she said. "That girl needs someone who can be patient." "I am not trying to court her," Kyle protested, though the words felt like a lie even as he said them. Martha just smiled knowingly. "Of course not, dear." But the truth was, Kyle could not stop thinking about Hannah. He thought about her while he rode fence lines, while he broke horses, while he lay in his bunk at night staring at the ceiling. He thought about the sadness in her eyes and the strength it must have taken to run, to start over in a strange place with nothing but hope and determination. He thought about how she gentled the wild children of Chloride with the same soft patience he used with skittish horses. October brought cooler temperatures to the Arizona desert, though the days were still warm. The town prepared for the annual Harvest Festival, a larger celebration than the dance had been, with competitions and games and a communal dinner. Kyle entered his horse lucky in the riding competition, though he knew Thompson's Arabian would probably win. The day of the festival, the whole town turned out. Families spread blankets on the ground. Children ran wild playing tag between the adults, and the smell of roasting meat filled the air. Kyle competed in the riding competition and came in second, which was respectable. He was just collecting his ribbon when he spotted Hannah sitting on a blanket with some of the schoolchildren, helping them make corn husk dolls. He wandered over, moving slow and steady. "Mind if I join you?" Hannah looked up, shading her eyes against the sun. "Of course not, Mr. Thatcher. Kyle, please. I think we have known each other long enough to use first names." A small smile touched her lips. "All right, Kyle, and you should call me Hannah." He settled onto the edge of the blanket, careful to leave plenty of space between them. One of the little girls, Amy Chen's younger sister Lily, immediately climbed into his lap and showed him the doll she was making. "See, Mr. Kyle. Miss Hannah showed me how to make the dress from this corn silk." "That is mighty fine work, Miss Lily," Kyle said seriously, examining the small doll. "Your sister will be jealous." They spent the afternoon like that, sitting together but not quite together, talking in the spaces between helping children with their crafts. Kyle learned that Hannah was from Pennsylvania originally, that she had been educated at a proper school for young ladies, that she had always loved teaching. What she did not tell him, what she carefully avoided mentioning, was why she had left Pennsylvania, why she had traveled all the way to a rough mining town in the Arizona Territory. Kyle did not push. She would tell him when she was ready, or she would not. Either way, he would be patient. As the sun began to set and families started packing up to head home, Kyle helped Hannah gather the craft supplies and walk them back to the schoolhouse. They strolled slowly through the quiet streets, their shadows long in the golden light. "Can I ask you something?" Hannah said suddenly. "Anything? Why do you move the way you do, around me, I mean, so slow and careful?" Kyle considered his answer carefully. "I worked with horses for a long time, still do, and the thing about horses is they remember everything. You hit a horse once, even accidentally, and it will never fully trust you again. You have to earn that trust back bit by showing them through your actions that you mean no harm." He looked at her directly. "I figure people are not so different." Hannah stopped walking. They were in front of the boarding house now, the windows warm with lamplight. Her eyes searched his face, looking for something. "I was married," she said quietly, "back in Pennsylvania, to a man named Gerald. He was charming at first, attentive. But after the wedding he changed. Or maybe he just stopped pretending to be someone he was not." She wrapped her arms around herself, though the evening was not cold. "He hit me, often, for small things, for nothing at all. I learned to be very quiet, very still, to anticipate his moods, but it was never enough." Kyle felt rage building in his chest, but he kept it off his face, kept his breathing steady. Hannah did not need his anger right now. She needed him to listen. "One day he beat me so badly that I could not stand up for 2 days. Our neighbor, an elderly widow, she helped me. She gave me money, helped me pack a bag, and got me to the train station while Gerald was at work. She told me to run as far as I could and never look back." Hannah's voice cracked. "I do not even know if she is all right. Gerald was so angry when he got home and found me gone. I am afraid of what he might have done to her." "You did not have a choice," Kyle said gently. "You had to save yourself first, I know, but knowing does not make the guilt go away." She looked up at him, and in the fading light he could see the tears on her cheeks. "I am broken, Kyle. I flinch at shadows. I cannot sleep through the night without nightmares. I am not sure I can ever be normal again." Kyle wanted to reach out, to wipe away those tears, to hold her and promise her everything would be all right. But he kept his hands at his sides, kept his movements minimal. "You are not broken. You are healing. There is a difference. How can you be sure?" "Because I have seen you with those children. I have seen you laugh and smile and be patient when they are difficult. I have seen you make a life here, make friends, find purpose. That is not broken. That is brave." Hannah let out a shaky breath. "Thank you for understanding, for not pushing, for moving slow, always," Kyle said. "For as long as you need." After that night, something changed between them. Hannah began to seek out Kyle's company rather than just accepting it. She would wave when she saw him in town, would stop to talk rather than hurrying past. When he brought books for the schoolchildren, she would linger to discuss them with him, arguing good-naturedly about whether Cooper or Twain was the better writer. November brought the first cold snaps, the desert nights dropping to near freezing while the days remained pleasant. Kyle started finding reasons to check on Hannah more often, making sure she had enough firewood for her room at the boarding house, ensuring she had a warm coat for the walk to and from the schoolhouse. "You are going to make people talk," Hannah warned him one afternoon as he loaded an armful of firewood into the boarding house shed. "Let them talk," Kyle said. "I am just being neighborly." "You are not this neighborly with anyone else," he grinned at her. "Well now, that is not entirely true. I brought old Pete some tobacco just last week." Hannah laughed, and Kyle thought the sound was better than any music. She had been laughing more lately, and the perpetual shadow of fear in her eyes was beginning to fade. She still flinched sometimes at sudden movements, but not always. Not with Kyle. One cold afternoon in late November, Kyle was shoeing a horse when young Billy Thompson came running up to the ranch, his face red and gasping for breath. "Mr. Thatcher, you have got to come quick. There is a man at the boarding house asking about Miss Zimmerman. Martha says he looks like trouble." Kyle's blood ran cold. He dropped the horse's hoof and grabbed his coat, already running for Lucky. "What kind of man?" "City man. Eastern clothes. Angry looking. He has been asking if anyone knows a Hannah Zimmerman, says she is his wife and she ran away." "Gerald, it had to be." Kyle pushed Lucky faster than was wise, his mind racing. How had the man found her? What did he want? More importantly, was Hannah safe? He reached town in record time, Lucky's sides heaving. The scene outside the boarding house confirmed his worst fears. A well-dressed man in his 30s stood on the porch, arguing with Martha, who had positioned herself firmly in the doorway like a bulldog guarding her territory. Several townspeople had gathered to watch, including Sheriff Morrison. "I have a right to see my wife," the man was saying, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. Kyle recognized that tone, that edge of violence. "And I have a right to refuse entry to my establishment to anyone I please," Martha shot back. "And I do not like the look of you." Kyle dismounted and approached slowly, assessing the situation. The man was about his height but heavier, with the soft build of someone who worked behind a desk. His clothes were expensive, his shoes polished. This was a man used to getting his way through money and intimidation. "There a problem here?" Kyle asked, his voice calm. The man turned to him, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" "Kyle Thatcher. I am a friend of Miss Zimmerman's." "Miss?" The man's laugh was ugly. "She is Mrs. Gerald Zimmerman, my legal wife. She ran away from home, and I have come to bring her back where she belongs." "Seems to me," Sheriff Morrison interjected, stepping forward, "that if a woman does not want to go with a man, legal wife or not, we cannot force her." "This is not a legal matter," Gerald said coldly. "This is a family matter. Hannah is confused, ill. She needs to come home where she can be properly cared for." "She seems pretty clear-headed to me," Kyle said. He could feel his temper rising but forced himself to stay calm. Getting angry would not help Hannah. "And who exactly are you to have an opinion on my wife's state of mind?" Before Kyle could answer, the door behind Martha opened, and Hannah stepped out onto the porch. She was pale, her hands shaking, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Hello, Gerald." Gerald's expression shifted, becoming softer, almost concerned. Kyle recognized the manipulation immediately. "Hannah, darling, thank God, I have been so worried. You are not well. Let me take you home. I am not going anywhere with you. Do not be ridiculous. You are my wife. You belong with me." "I belong to myself," Hannah said, and Kyle had never been more proud of anyone in his life. "I left you because you hurt me. You beat me until I could barely walk. You made my life a living hell. You are exaggerating, being dramatic as always. I may have disciplined you occasionally when you were hysterical, but it was for your own good." The casual way he said it, as though beating a woman was normal and acceptable, made Kyle's hands curl into fists. But he kept them at his sides, kept his breathing steady. "Disciplined," Hannah repeated, her voice shaking now with anger rather than fear. "You broke my ribs, Gerald. You gave me a concussion so severe I could not see straight for a week. You locked me in the cellar for days at a time. That is not discipline. That is torture." Murmurs ran through the gathered crowd. Gerald's carefully composed expression began to crack. "You are making me look like a monster in front of these people," he hissed. "You are a monster. I am just telling the truth." Gerald lunged forward, his hand raised, and Hannah flinched backward. But before he could reach her, Kyle moved. In one smooth motion, he stepped between them, catching Gerald's wrist in an iron grip. "I would not do that if I were you," Kyle said quietly, his voice cold as winter ice. Gerald tried to pull free, but Kyle's grip was unbreakable. "Let go of me. This is between me and my wife. Your wife just told you she is not going with you. Seems to me that ends the discussion." Sheriff Morrison stepped up beside Kyle. "I think it might be best if you left town, Mr. Zimmerman. We do not take kindly to men who hurt women around here." "You cannot keep me from my legal wife." "Actually," said a new voice, and everyone turned to see Judge Williams approaching, "she can file for divorce on grounds of cruelty. I assume you have witnesses to the abuse, Mrs. Zimmerman." Hannah nodded. "Our neighbor, Mrs. Patricia Walsh. She saw the bruises, helped me escape. She would testify. Then, until such time as a divorce is finalized, I suggest you maintain a distance from Mrs. Zimmerman," the judge said. "Sheriff, if Mr. Zimmerman refuses to leave town, You have my permission to jail him for disturbing the peace." Gerald's face had gone purple with rage. "This is not over, Hannah. You are my wife. You made vows." "You made vows too," Hannah said, her voice stronger now. "To love and cherish. You broke those vows every time you raised your hand to me." Kyle released Gerald's wrist and took a step back, keeping himself between Gerald and Hannah. The whole town was watching now, and there was no sympathy in their eyes for the well-dressed stranger. In a place like Chloride, where survival depended on community, where women were valued for their scarcity and their strength, a man who beat his wife was lower than dirt. Gerald seemed to realize he had lost this battle. His expression went cold and hard. "Fine, have your divorce. But do not think you will get a penny from me. You will end up destitute, crawling back, begging me to take you back." "I would rather starve than spend another day with you," Hannah said. Gerald turned and stalked to his horse, mounted up, and rode out of town without another word. The gathered crowd watched him go in silence. Then, as the dust settled, people began to drift away, though many stopped to squeeze Hannah's hand or offer words of support. When everyone had gone except Kyle, Martha, and the sheriff, Hannah's knees gave out. Kyle caught her before she hit the ground, sweeping her up in his arms without thinking. "I have got you," he murmured. "You are safe." Hannah buried her face against his shoulder and sobbed, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Kyle carried her into the boarding house and settled her gently on the parlor sofa, then stepped back to give her space. Martha sat beside her, pulling the girl into a motherly embrace while Kyle and the sheriff stood awkwardly nearby. "That was a brave thing you did," the sheriff said to Hannah when her tears had slowed. "Standing up to him like that." "I was terrified," Hannah admitted, her voice raw. "Brave is not about not being scared. It is about doing what is right even when you are scared." The sheriff turned to Kyle. "You did good too, son. Kept your head when things got tense." After the sheriff left, Kyle sat in the chair across from the sofa, his hands clasped between his knees. "Is there anything you need?" Hannah wiped her eyes. "I need to write to Mrs. Walsh, see if she will agree to testify. And I need to figure out how to pay for a lawyer. Judge Williams might know someone who will take the case for a reduced fee," Martha suggested. "And you know half the town will chip in to help if you need it." "I cannot ask people to do that." "You are not asking," Kyle said. "We are offering. That is what communities do. We help each other." Hannah looked at him, really looked at him, and Kyle felt something shift in his chest. In that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that he loved this woman. Not just her courage or her kindness, but all of her, scars and fears and all. Over the next few weeks, the process of filing for divorce began. Mrs. Walsh sent a letter confirming she would testify, along with detailed accounts of what she had witnessed. The letter also assured Hannah that she was fine, that Gerald had not retaliated against her. A lawyer from Phoenix agreed to handle the case, moved by the details and willing to work for reduced fees. Through it all, Kyle was there. Not hovering, not smothering, but present. He helped Hannah write difficult letters, sat with her when the memories became too much, gave her space when she needed to be alone. And always, always, he moved slow and careful, telegraphing his intentions, giving her control. December brought unexpected rain to the desert, cold and steady. The schoolhouse developed a leak, and Kyle spent an afternoon repairing the roof while Hannah and Miss Peters moved the children's desks to dry spots. Afterward, Hannah invited him to stay for the children's winter program rehearsal. Kyle sat in the back of the classroom and watched as Hannah gently guided the younger children through a simple play about the Nativity. She was patient when they forgot their lines, encouraging when they got nervous, and playful in a way that brought out the best in them. Watching her, Kyle could hardly believe this was the same terrified woman who had fallen into the water trough 4 months ago, after rehearsal. As they walked back toward the boarding house in the light rain, Hannah slipped her hand into Kyle's. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact, and Kyle felt his heart race. He closed his fingers gently around hers, not too tight, just enough to let her know he was there. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For being patient with me, for moving slow, for giving me time to heal. You do not have to thank me for treating you with basic decency, Hannah. But it is more than that, and you know it." She stopped walking and turned to face him, rain dripping from the brim of her bonnet. "You have been kind to me when you did not have to be. You have protected me, supported me, never once asked for anything in return. I do not need anything in return." "What if I want to give you something anyway?" Kyle's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I—" She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I have feelings for you, Kyle. Real feelings. And I think you might have feelings for me too." "I do," he admitted. "I have since the day you fell in that water trough. Maybe even before that, the moment I saw the fear in your eyes and wanted nothing more than to make it go away. I am still healing. I still have nightmares. I still flinch sometimes. I know. And I am still going to move slow. I am still going to be patient. I am still going to wait as long as you need. What if I do not want to wait anymore?" Kyle cupped her face gently in his hands, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she did not, when she leaned into his touch instead, he lowered his head slowly and kissed her. It was a soft kiss, gentle and sweet, a question rather than a demand. Hannah's lips trembled beneath his, but she kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. They stood there in the rain, kissing like they had all the time in the world, and for Kyle, it was the most perfect moment of his life. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Hannah was smiling. "I think I have been wanting you to do that for weeks. I have been wanting to do that since the harvest dance," Kyle admitted. "Then why did you wait so long?" "Because you were worth waiting for." Christmas came to Chloride with more rain and unseasonably cold temperatures. The town decorated the main street with pine boughs and ribbons, and the church held special services. Kyle invited Hannah to spend Christmas Day at his ranch, and she accepted. The ranch house was small but comfortable, a 3-room structure that Kyle had built himself. He had decorated with pine branches and made a feast of roasted chicken, potatoes, and vegetables from his small garden. They ate by lamplight, talking and laughing, and afterward sat by the fire while rain pattered on the roof. "I love what you have built here," Hannah said, looking around the cozy space. "You must be very proud." "It is not much, but it is mine. I worked for every board and nail. It is perfect. It is a home, not just a house. I can feel the love you have put into it." Kyle reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I have been thinking about the future, about what I want." "What do you want?" "I want to wake up every morning and see you across the breakfast table. I want to work hard all day knowing you are waiting for me to come home. I want to grow old with you, build a life with you." He took a deep breath. "I want to marry you, Hannah. Not now, not until you are ready, but someday. When your divorce is final and you have had time to be free, to be your own person. But I needed you to know that is where my heart is." Hannah was quiet for a long moment, her eyes bright with tears. "I never thought I would want to marry again. I thought Gerald had ruined marriage for me forever. But when I picture my future now, you are always in it. Not because I need you to save me or protect me, but because I choose you, because you make me want to be brave. You are already brave. Then you make me want to be happy, and I have not wanted that in a very long time." The winter passed slowly, each day bringing Hannah and Kyle closer together. The divorce proceedings moved forward with agonizing slowness, delayed by distance and legal complications. Gerald contested it, of course, but Mrs. Walsh's testimony was damning, and the judge ultimately ruled in Hannah's favor. The official decree came through in March of 1883, declaring the marriage dissolved on grounds of extreme cruelty. Hannah cried when she received the news, but they were tears of relief and joy. She was free. Kyle wanted to propose immediately, but he held back. Hannah had asked him to wait a little longer, to give her time to truly feel her freedom, to know herself as an unmarried woman before she committed to marriage again. He understood, even though waiting was difficult. Spring brought wildflowers to the desert, splashes of color against the brown landscape. Hannah and Kyle took long walks together, talking about everything and nothing. She told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, her love of books, her dreams of having children someday. He told her about growing up on the frontier, about losing his parents, about building his ranch from nothing. They kissed often now, long, slow kisses that made Kyle's heart race and his blood heat. But he never pushed for more, never assumed. When Hannah was ready to take that step, she would tell him. In May, Hannah approached Kyle with a shy smile. "I've been thinking about what you asked me, about marriage." Kyle's heart leaped. And I would like to say yes if the offer still stands. It stands. It will always stand. "Then yes, Kyle Thatcher, I will marry you." Kyle swept her up in his arms, spinning her around while she laughed. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, pouring all his love and joy into the contact. They were both breathless when they finally broke apart. "When?" Kyle asked. "Soon. I do not want a long engagement. I have wasted too much of my life already being afraid. I want to start living." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Chloride. Hannah wore a dress that Martha and Mrs. Chen had made for her, a beautiful creation of ivory lace that made her look like an angel. Kyle wore his best suit, his hair slicked back, his hands shaking as he placed the ring on her finger. The whole town turned out for the celebration afterward, bringing food and well wishes. They danced in the same barn where they had first waltzed together, but this time Hannah moved with confidence, her eyes never leaving Kyle's face. That night, Kyle carried Hannah across the threshold of the ranch house, their home now. He set her down gently in the bedroom, suddenly nervous despite everything. "We can wait," he said, "if you are not ready." Hannah smiled and cupped his face in her hands. "I am ready. I trust you. I love you. I love you too, more than anything." They came together slowly, gently, Kyle's hands reverent as he helped her out of her dress. He took his time, learning every inch of her, showing her with touch what love could be. There was no rush, no violence, just tenderness and passion and the joy of two people choosing each other. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Hannah's head on Kyle's chest, his fingers trailing through her hair. "I never knew it could be like that," she whispered. "Like what?" "Beautiful. Gentle. Something to look forward to rather than dread." Kyle pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "It will always be like that with me. I promise." Summer settled over the Arizona territory, bringing blazing heat and cloudless skies. Hannah threw herself into making the ranch house a home, planting a garden, sewing curtains, rearranging furniture. She continued teaching at the schoolhouse through the end of the term, but announced she would not be returning in the fall. "Are you sure?" Miss Peters asked, disappointed. "The children adore you, I am sure. I have other priorities now." Hannah placed a hand on her still flat stomach, a secret smile on her face. She told Kyle that night over dinner, watching his face carefully for his reaction. His eyes went wide, then bright with tears, and then he was pulling her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "A baby," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We are having a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy does not even begin to cover it. I am everything good at once." The pregnancy was not easy. The desert heat made Hannah sick, and she struggled with nausea well into her second trimester. But Kyle was attentive, bringing her water, fanning her when she was hot, holding her hair when she was ill. He hired a woman from town to help with the heavy housework, insisting that Hannah rest and take care of herself. "I can still work," Hannah protested. "I am not an invalid." "I know you are not, but you are carrying our child and I want to make sure you are both healthy. Let me take care of you, please." Hannah relented, touched by his concern. She spent her days reading, sewing baby clothes, and preparing for the new arrival. The townswomen threw her a party, bringing gifts and advice. Martha cried with joy, declaring herself the baby's honorary grandmother. In December, as the cold weather returned, Hannah went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours. Kyle stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, encouraging her when she wanted to give up. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, their son was born. He came into the world screaming, healthy and strong, with a shock of dark hair and his father's green eyes. "A boy," the midwife announced, placing the baby in Hannah's arms. Hannah looked down at her son, tears streaming down her face. "He is perfect." Kyle could only nod, too overcome with emotion to speak. He had never imagined he could feel this much love, this sense of completion. They named him Matthew after Kyle's father. Matthew Kyle Thatcher, born December 15, 1883. He was a good baby, quick to smile and slow to fuss. Kyle would spend hours just holding him, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes, whispering promises about the life they would build together. Hannah blossomed into motherhood. The fear that had once dominated her life was replaced by fierce protectiveness and joy. She sang to Matthew, told him stories, taught him to notice the beauty in the desert landscape. And every day, she thanked God for the courage it had taken to leave Gerald, because without that courage, she would never have found Kyle and this beautiful life. The years passed in a blur of happy chaos. Matthew grew into a curious, energetic toddler who kept his parents on their toes. The ranch prospered under Kyle's careful management, and he hired a couple of hands to help with the work. Hannah started giving piano lessons in town, using the skills from her finishing school days to bring culture to Chloride. When Matthew was 3, Hannah became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the summer of 1887, she gave birth to twin girls. They named them Rose and Lily, and Kyle joked that he was now hopelessly outnumbered by females. The girls were identical, with Hannah's dark hair and delicate features. They were also complete opposites in personality. Rose was bold and adventurous, always getting into mischief. Lily was quiet and thoughtful, content to sit with her mother and look at picture books. Life with 3 small children was exhausting but wonderful. The ranch house was filled with laughter and noise, toys scattered everywhere, tiny handprints on every surface. Kyle added 2 more rooms to the house to accommodate the growing family, and Hannah planted roses around the front porch, creating a small oasis of beauty in the harsh desert. One evening, when the children were finally asleep, Kyle and Hannah sat on the porch swing, watching the stars come out. "Do you ever think about Pennsylvania?" Kyle asked. "About what your life would have been if you had stayed?" Hannah was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes, but not with regret, only with gratitude that I found the strength to leave. Everything good in my life came from that choice. You, the children, this place, I would not trade it for anything. Even on the hard days, especially on the hard days, because the hard days here are still better than the best days were with Gerald." She took his hand, pressing it to her cheek. "You saved me, Kyle. Not by rescuing me like some damsel in a story, but by showing me what love actually looks like. By moving slow and giving me time to heal. By being patient when I was broken and celebrating with me as I put myself back together. You saved yourself, Kyle said. You got on that train. You came to Chloride. You built a new life. I just had the privilege of being part of it. They sat in comfortable silence, the only sounds the chirping of crickets and the distant howl of coyotes. Inside, one of the twins started crying and Hannah moved to get up, but Kyle stopped her. I will get her. You rest. He found Rose standing in her crib, tears streaming down her chubby cheeks. The moment she saw her father, she reached for him and Kyle scooped her up, settling her against his shoulder. What is wrong, little Rose? Bad dream. Rose nodded against his neck, her small body shaking with leftover sobs. Kyle carried her back to the porch, where Hannah had pulled out a blanket. They sat together on the swing, Rose between them, rocking gently as the little girl's breathing evened out. This is my favorite time, Hannah said softly. When the children are asleep and it is just us and the quiet. Mine too. Though I also love the chaos of breakfast, all of them talking at once, fighting over who gets which plate. You are such a good father. Better than I ever dared hope for them. I had a good example, and I have a good partner. He looked at her over their daughter's head. I love you, Hannah Thatcher. I have loved you from the moment I saw you fall into that water trough, and I will love you until the day I die. And beyond, I hope. And beyond. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges. The town of Chloride grew as the mine expanded, bringing new families and new opportunities. The schoolhouse was rebuilt larger, and Hannah sometimes filled in when a teacher was needed, though her primary focus remained her own children. Matthew grew into a serious, responsible boy who loved working alongside his father on the ranch. He had Kyle's steady temperament and Hannah's sharp mind, and everyone agreed he would do great things someday. The twins were 7 now, attending school and learning to read and write with the same enthusiasm Hannah had once brought to her teaching. In 1890, Hannah became pregnant once more, surprising them both as they had assumed their family was complete. This pregnancy was harder than the others, complicated by Hannah's age and the fact that she was now 32. Kyle fretted over her constantly, earning him gentle teasing from both Hannah and Martha. I survived Gerald's fists, Hannah reminded him. I think I can survive having a baby. That does not mean I am not going to worry. Their second son was born in March of 1891, small but healthy. They named him James, and he quickly proved to be the most easygoing of all their children. Where Matthew had been serious and the twins energetic, James was content to simply observe the world with wide, curious eyes. Kyle was 45 now, his hair starting to gray at the temples, his hands bearing the scars of a lifetime of hard work. But he was happy in a way he had never imagined possible. Every morning he woke up next to the woman he loved. Every evening he came home to children who ran to greet him. He had built something lasting and good, a legacy of love rather than just land and cattle. One Sunday after church, when James was about 2 years old, Hannah pulled Kyle aside with a serious expression. I need to tell you something. Kyle's heart clenched with worry. What is wrong? Are you sick? No, nothing like that. I received a letter from Mrs. Walsh in Pennsylvania. Kyle relaxed slightly. Hannah corresponded regularly with the woman who had helped her escape, sending pictures of the children and updates on their life. What did she say? Gerald is dead. He died 6 months ago from a heart condition. Mrs. Walsh thought I should know. Kyle studied Hannah's face, trying to read her emotions. How do you feel about that? Relieved, Hannah admitted. I know that is probably wrong to feel relieved about someone's death, but I cannot help it. For years I have been waiting for him to show up again, to try to take me back or hurt me or the children. Now I know he never can. That is not wrong. That is human." Kyle pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "You are safe now, truly, completely safe." Hannah clung to him, and Kyle felt wetness on his shirt. She was crying, but he knew these were tears of release, of finally letting go of the last shadow of fear that had haunted her. That night, after the children were asleep, Kyle and Hannah made love with an urgency that had been absent for years. It was as though knowing Gerald was truly gone had freed something in Hannah, allowed her to be fully present in a way she had not quite managed before. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Hannah spoke into the quiet. "I never told you how terrified I was that first night, our wedding night. I know you were. But you were so patient, so gentle. You made it beautiful instead of frightening. You have always made everything beautiful. That is because you make me want to be the best version of myself. You and the children, you are my purpose." Life settled into a peaceful rhythm. Matthew, now 13, was talking about wanting to go to university someday, perhaps to study law. The twins at 10 were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into mischief together. And James at 3 was a happy, babbling presence that kept everyone entertained. Kyle expanded the ranch again, buying adjoining land and increasing the herd. He hired more hands, including a young man named David who reminded Kyle of himself at that age, hardworking and honest. The ranch became one of the most successful in the region, known for quality horses and fair dealing. Hannah's piano students grew in number, and she started hosting small concerts in town, giving the children a chance to perform. She also began teaching reading and writing to some of the Mexican families who worked at the mine, recognizing in their struggles to communicate a chance to make a real difference. "You cannot save everyone," Kyle told her gently when she came home exhausted after an evening of lessons. "I know. But I can help a few, and if everyone helps a few, then everyone gets helped." In 1895, when Matthew was 17 and preparing to leave for university in California, the family gathered for a special dinner. Hannah had cooked all of Matthew's favorite foods, and the table was laden with roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie. "I am going to miss this," Matthew said, looking around at his family. "The noise, the chaos, even the twins arguing over everything." "We are going to miss you too," Rose said, for once serious. "But we are also proud of you," Lily added. "You are going to do great things," Kyle said. "I know it. But remember, no matter how far you go or what you accomplish, you always have a home here." "I will remember, Pa. You and Ma have given me everything. The best example of what love and marriage should look like, the best childhood anyone could ask for. I am going to make you proud." "You already have," Hannah said, tears in her eyes. After Matthew left for school, the house felt strangely quiet despite still having 3 children at home. Kyle caught Hannah standing in Matthew's empty room more than once, holding one of his old shirts. "He will come back for holidays," Kyle reminded her. "I know. But he will never really come back, not as the boy he was. He is becoming a man, starting his own life. That is how it should be, but it does not make it easier." No, it does not. The twins were growing too, changing from little girls into young women. At 15, they were both tall and graceful, though their personalities remained distinctly different. Rose wanted to be a rancher like her father, while Lily dreamed of becoming a teacher like their mother had been. James at 8 was still the baby of the family, doted on by his sisters and spoiled by his mother. He had his father's way with animals and could often be found in the barn, talking to the horses as though they could understand him. One evening in the summer of 1898, Kyle and Hannah celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. The children had conspired with Martha to plan a surprise party at the boarding house, inviting half the town. 15 years, Kyle said, raising his glass in a toast. 15 years of being married to the most remarkable woman I have ever known. She has made me happier than I ever thought possible, given me 4 incredible children, and created a home filled with love and laughter. Here is to 15 more and 15 more after that. Everyone cheered and clinked glasses. Hannah stood up, her own glass raised. I want to say something too. When I came to Chloride 16 years ago, I was broken. I was so afraid of my own shadow that I fell into a water trough when someone waved goodbye. I thought I would spend the rest of my life being afraid, being alone. But then I met a man who moved slow, who understood that trust is earned, not demanded, who showed me through his actions every single day that love does not have to hurt. She looked directly at Kyle, her eyes bright with tears. You healed me, Kyle, not by fixing me, but by giving me the space and safety to fix myself. I love you more today than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. Thank you for being patient. Thank you for moving slow. There was not a dry eye in the room. The years continued their steady march. Matthew graduated from university and took a position with a law firm in San Francisco, though he came home to visit as often as he could. The twins graduated from the schoolhouse, and Rose started working full-time on the ranch while Lily took a position as a teacher. James grew into a quiet, thoughtful teenager who loved poetry and nature. He talked about wanting to travel, to see the world beyond Arizona's borders, and Kyle encouraged him, even though the thought of another child leaving made his heart ache. Kyle was 56 now, his hair fully gray, his body bearing the aches and pains of decades of hard work. But he still rode out every morning to check on the cattle, still broke horses when needed, still worked alongside his hired hands rather than just directing them. Hannah at 40 was still beautiful, though time had added silver to her hair and lines around her eyes. Kyle thought she had never been more lovely than she was now, her face showing the evidence of a life well lived, filled with laughter and love. One autumn evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Hannah leaned her head on Kyle's shoulder. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Taking on a broken woman with so much baggage?" "Never, not for a single second." He kissed the top of her head. "You were never broken, Hannah, just hurt. And watching you heal, watching you become the woman you were meant to be, has been the greatest privilege of my life. We have had a good life, have we not? The best. Better than I ever dreamed possible." In 1905, Matthew returned home with news. He was engaged to a lovely young woman named Sarah, a teacher he had met in San Francisco. They were married that spring in a beautiful ceremony, and Hannah cried through the entire thing, overwhelmed with joy for her son. Rose announced her own engagement later that year, to David, the ranch hand Kyle had hired years ago. They planned to build a house on the far edge of the ranch property and continue working the land together. Lily had been courting a young man from Phoenix, a fellow teacher, and everyone expected an engagement announcement any day. Only James remained unattached, but at 18 he was still young, still finding his way. In the summer of 1906, Matthew and Sarah gave Kyle and Hannah their first grandchild, a baby girl they named Hannah after her grandmother. When Kyle held his granddaughter for the first time, he was transported back to the day Matthew was born, to holding that tiny, perfect life and feeling overwhelmed with love. "This never gets old," he told Hannah, who stood beside him beaming. "This feeling of holding someone you love this much." "No," Hannah agreed, "it never does." Rose and David married in the fall, and by the following spring, Rose was pregnant with twins. "Apparently they run in the family," she joked when she told her parents the news. Lily got engaged to her teacher, a kind man named Thomas, and they planned a wedding for the following year. James announced he had been accepted to a university back east to study literature. "I want to be a writer," he told his parents nervously, as though expecting disapproval. "Then be a writer," Kyle said. "Be the best writer you can be. We will support you no matter what." In 1908, Kyle and Hannah celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Matthew and Sarah had brought their 3 children from California. Rose and David had their twin boys, just a year old. Lily and Thomas were newlyweds, glowing with happiness. And James was home on break from school, full of stories about his studies. The ranch house overflowed with people and noise and love. Kyle stood in the doorway, watching his family, and felt his heart swell with gratitude. This life, this beautiful, chaotic, perfect life, had started with a woman falling into a water trough and a decision to move slow. "What are you thinking about?" Hannah asked, coming up beside him. "About how lucky I am. About how one small choice, the choice to be patient, led to all of this. I was thinking about choices too, about the choice to run, to start over, to trust again. Best decisions I ever made." Kyle pulled her close, kissing her temple. "We have built something good here. We have built something extraordinary." They stood there together, watching their family, and Kyle knew that whatever years they had left would be filled with the same love and joy that had defined the last 25. He had learned to move slow for Hannah, but in doing so, he had found everything that mattered. The years that followed were gentler, slower. Kyle gradually handed over more of the ranch operations to Rose and David, though he still rode out most days to check on things. Hannah continued her teaching and her music, finding joy in sharing her gifts with the next generation. They became the heart of the family, the anchor that everyone returned to. Holiday gatherings happened at the ranch, with children and grandchildren spilling out of every room. Summer visits stretched for weeks, the house alive with laughter and storytelling. In 1915, as Kyle approached his 70th birthday, he started having trouble with his heart. The doctor told him to take it easy, to rest more, but Kyle was stubborn. He had spent his life working, and he was not about to stop now. Hannah fussed over him, made him take his medicine, insisted he nap in the afternoons. Kyle grumbled but complied, secretly touched by her concern. "I am not ready to lose you," Hannah told him one night, her voice fierce. "We still have too much living to do." "I am not going anywhere," Kyle promised. "I have too much to live for." And he kept that promise. He slowed down, yes, but he did not stop. He was there when James published his first book, a collection of poems about the West that earned critical acclaim. He was there when Matthew was appointed to the bench, becoming a judge. He was there for the births of more grandchildren than he could easily count, each one a blessing. Hannah aged beside him, her hair white now, her movements slower, but her spirit as strong as ever. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sunset, talking about their life or sitting in comfortable silence. "You remember the first time you kissed me?" Hannah asked one evening. "In the rain, after you told me about Gerald. How could I forget? I was so scared, not of you, but of feeling that much, of wanting something good after so much bad. And now I cannot imagine my life without you. You are woven into every part of me, every happy memory, every moment of joy. You are my home, Kyle Thatcher. And you are mine." In the spring of 1920, they celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary surrounded by 4 children, 12 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. The house was bursting at the seams, chaos and love in equal measure. Kyle watched Hannah move through the crowd, still graceful despite her years, still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. She caught his eye and smiled, and Kyle felt his heart skip a beat just like it had all those years ago. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Kyle and Hannah lay in their room, hands clasped between them. "I have been thinking," Kyle said, "about what I want my legacy to be. You have already created your legacy. 4 successful, happy children, a ranch that will support generations, a community you have helped build. That is all good, but I want my real legacy to be something else. I want it to be that I loved you well, that I showed our children and grandchildren what love should look like. That I moved slow when the world wanted to rush, that I was patient when patience was needed, that I chose kindness over anger every single day." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "You have done all of that and more. You have loved me better than I ever thought possible. You have shown me that I was worthy of love, that my past did not define my future. You gave me the space to heal and the courage to live." "We healed each other," Kyle said. "You taught me that real strength is in gentleness, that the bravest thing is to keep going even when you are terrified. You made me a better man." They fell asleep like that, hands clasped, hearts full, surrounded by the life they had built together. Kyle lived to be 78, surrounded by love until the very end. When he passed peacefully in his sleep in 1923, Hannah held his hand and whispered words of love into his ear, thanking him one last time for moving slow, for being patient, for showing her what love could be. Hannah lived another 5 years, long enough to see all her children settled and happy, long enough to hold her great-great-grandchildren. She spent her final years on the ranch, surrounded by family, telling stories about the cowboy who learned to move slow and the broken woman who learned to fly. When she passed in 1928, her children buried her next to Kyle under a cottonwood tree on the ranch, their gravestones simple but meaningful. Kyle's read, "A patient man, a gentle soul, beloved husband and father." Hannah's read, "She learned to live without fear, she learned to love without limits." And the legacy they left behind was not just land or money or possessions. It was a family built on love and patience, on kindness and understanding. It was children who knew what a healthy marriage looked like, who grew up without fear, who learned that real strength is in gentleness. Years later, one of their great-granddaughters would write a book about them, about the cowboy who learned to move slow and the woman who flinched at raised hands but learned to dance again. The book would become a bestseller, inspiring others to choose patience over force, kindness over cruelty, love over fear. But for Kyle and Hannah, the story was never about inspiration or legacy. It was simply about 2 broken people who found each other in a dusty Arizona town and chose to build something beautiful together. It was about the power of moving slow in a world that wanted to rush, of being gentle in a harsh place, of loving someone enough to give them space to heal. And in the end, that was the greatest story of all.